When you think back on your high school experience, what stands out in your mind? Some of you may be thinking about the struggles of fitting in, while others may look back and see their glory days as just that, glorious. And some of you will think about the feelings of anxiety and estrangement that come with being a teenager who is seemingly never taken seriously. But in any case, for most people, high school was a time where your problems seemed like mountains to overcome, and your most coveted relationships were always with your friends, as misery loves company and, well, let's face it, what is being a teenager in senior high, if not miserable? These are themes that can be found in many coming-of-age horror films, and in some ways it has cemented itself as a reliable trope for most teen horror films of the 1990s. From the struggles of finding friends to dealing with peer pressure, and of course having to validate your fears by proving that your teachers have been taken over by extraterrestrial monsters who want to destroy the human race, The Faculty is a film that faces all of it with horror, humor, and a whole lot of goo. And now, 25 years since the release of this film, it is clear that this teen slasher, science fiction, mystery movie is a truly inspired reflection of the high school experience, but amped up with its supernatural sprinkled story. And tonight, we're gonna look back on the underrated film from Robert Rodriguez that has more history, more relevance, and more to offer than meets the eye. Join me in today's breakdown of The Faculty, where we deconstruct the details to figure out why it's awesome and what we can learn from Kevin Williamson's endless wisdom on surviving horror flicks. I'm Kier Gomes with JoBlo Horror, and you're watching Deconstructing. Now, the way this show works is we take a look at the movie from 4 key categories. First, we look at the origin, where we discuss the history of the film and how it got made. Then we move on to legacy, where we discuss some of the lasting impacts from the film since its release. Digging deeper into mystery and trivia, where I'll go into some of the dirty details from behind the scenes and give you a few fun facts about the movie. And then the X Factor, where I talk about the unforeseen elements that made this movie the true cinematic treasure that it is. And of course, what's a good horror retrospective without some tasty corn syrup and delicious carnage candy?
I've always wanted to do that.
Now, if you're ready, then remember to like the video, and of course keep your backs to the wall, because we are about to dive into The Faculty follows the story of a group of teens as they investigate the increasingly strange behavior of their parents and teachers within their high school in rural Ohio. As the teens get closer to solving the mystery, the threat of an evil alien colony grows bigger and bigger. Think Invasion of the Body Snatchers meets The Breakfast Club, but with a solid cast of 1990s pre-fame talent like Elijah Wood and Famke Janssen.
I'm gonna shove my foot so far up your ass, you'll be sucking my toes till graduation.
So, how did this all start? The Faculty was written by legendary horror screenwriter Kevin Williamson, who you know as the writer and creator of the classic slasher franchise, Scream. Although Scream was released 2 years before The Faculty, the movie was actually written before we got the likes of Sidney Prescott and Ghostface on the big screen. In fact, The Faculty was written in 1990, 5 years before Scream was even in production. Originally penned and pitched by David Weckner and Bruce Kimmel, The Faculty script was shopped around Tinseltown and pitched as an alien slasher film for teens. The only problem was the script was originally devoid of realistic teenage dialogue, and the characters were more cut and dry than a 90s angsty slasher movie would demand. So the film was not optioned by any Hollywood production studios. Until the success of Wes Craven's cult masterpiece, Scream, saw Hollywood begin to dust off any old scripts involving high school kids and murder. This renaissance of hack and slash summer cinema would of course come to be known as the 90s slasher era, where we got movies like Popcorn and I Know What You Did Last Summer. Included in that lineup is this movie, and after Scream became an instant smash hit, Miramax, or specifically Harvey and Bob Weinstein, bought the script from Weckner and Kimmel and then brought in screenwriter Kevin Williamson to rewrite it.
Hello?
The studio would have Williamson originally change the film's dialogue to better suit its young characters, as well as add in some new characters to make the story more of its time and appealing to young people. This is clear by the highly convincing dialogue, which is very true to how kids would talk to each other in the 1990s, at least for me and my friends.
Fuck you, tit bags.
Well, everybody calm down, please.
Kevin Williamson was also originally set to direct the film, as the Weinsteins felt that he had the best grasp of the material. But Williamson declined the gig to focus on his directorial debut, teaching Mrs. Tingle. I would say that Kevin Williamson probably regrets that choice, but honestly, it's not like this movie was a mega success either.
God damn it!
So, without Kevin Williamson to direct, the Weinsteins hired Robert Rodriguez after his sensational work on From Dusk Till Dawn. The film went into production in 1997, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, this movie was not critically well received and not as well loved as, say, Scream was. But the film didn't go without its fans from day one. I recall this movie being talked about fondly from members of my family and friend groups when I was young, and I've always looked back on this movie as an underappreciated gem waiting to be rediscovered by the masses and praised as a truly well-made recreation of the alien invasion subgenre. Hell, maybe that's what this video will be.
Yeah, right. Hey, it could happen.
Critically, the film was panned by most reputable sources, with Variety saying, "The faculty works hard at mixing a canny cocktail of synastic in-jokes, affectionate teensploitation, and high-octane suspense that's as enjoyable as it is impossible to take seriously." I can't sit here and say that the movie reinvented the genre or anything, and I can't even say that it's the best representation of teensploitation. But what I can say is that despite the underwhelming Rotten Tomatoes scores and the fact that it lost money in its opening weekend, the faculty's home release helped the filmmakers turn a profit, and I personally rewatch this movie often.
How do we know Spielberg, Lucas, Sonnenfeld, Emmerich haven't been visited by aliens? Maybe they're aliens themselves.
With a cast consisting of Jordana Brewster, Josh Hartnett, Clea Duvall, Elijah Wood, Salma Hayek, Sean Hattasey, Famke Janssen, Usher, Jon Stewart, and Robert Patrick, it's safe to say that this movie must have done something right. I mean, would you look at this f***ing cast?
They're just turning us into mindless slaves they can control.
In terms of the visual effects of this movie, I think it's easy to criticize movies for poor CGI, and especially movies released so close to the era of spectacle cinema like The Matrix and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man.
Crap, mega crap.
But if there is one film that I will defend for being clever with its use of digital effects and blending them perfectly with practical effects, it's this movie. The faculty not only had to face budget restrictions, which limited their use of expensive CGI, but they also had to balance the larger-than-life alien made with digital effects and also deliver anxiety-inducing practical effects for some of the film's more horrific moments. Safe to say, this movie is objectively remembered for its incredible cast and impressive effects. In some retrospectives going around the World Wide Web, the faculty has received praise for its blend of Kevin Williamson's sharp and witty teen drama and Robert Rodriguez's ability to capture horror and camp with mastery and precision. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the bottom line is that this movie lives on as a retrospective treat for horror fans, like you and me. Okay, listen to this. Now, this is something that I personally will mention to everyone in the room whenever this movie gets brought up, and I am not kidding at all. So, The Faculty was released in 1998, and one of the stars of the film, Jordana Brewster, was also in production on a film you may have heard of called The Fast and the Furious. Get this though, before the Fast saga became an absurd high-octane blockbuster franchise, the original film was considered a small, intimate film about cars. A small and intimate film about cars.
We're gonna have to dig deeper than that.
So Jordana Brewster was quoted as saying the following about The Faculty. It was sort of like the inverse of Fast and the Furious, right? So with the Fast and the Furious, I was like, this is a small movie about cars. It's a really fun summer project. But with the faculty, it was like, you guys, this is gonna be huge. Look at all of these successes around us, like She's All That and Scream. And then it turned out it wasn't so huge. We thought it was gonna be massive, but it was a cult classic, so that's really cool. I just love the idea that at the time, Jordana Brewster thought of Fast and the Furious as her fun summer project and considered The Faculty as her big break movie. Could that be more ironic?
It's like rain.
So whenever your friends or loved ones bring up this obscure 90s gem, be sure to mention that Jordana Brewster at one time considered The Faculty her magnum opus and The Fast and the Furious her intimate indie production. I'm sorry, I just can't get over how f***ing funny that is.
Yo, is this much fun, man?
And now, the segment we've been building up to, the reason we're here, the big one. It's the X Factor. Now, when I was rewatching this movie for the 100th time, I found myself really overthinking this segment. Mainly because I have so many personal biases towards the film and Robert Rodriguez and Kevin Williamson, but the purpose of this segment is to look at the accidental successes, or at least the unintentional elements that went on to become significant in the film's legacy. For example, John Carpenter had no idea that the simple, low-budget score he personally made for the Halloween film would go on to become the most iconic theme song in horror history. And not to compare Halloween to The Faculty, but you get what I mean. My first thought was to give the X Factor to the film's perfect representation of suburban high school life in the late 1990s. But in reality, the Weinsteins hiring Kevin Williamson was a move made specifically for that purpose, as William knows how to deliver authentic teen writing. Then of course, I considered using this segment to talk about the movie's rich themes like peer pressure, identity struggles, and the horrific accuracy of being gaslit by your own parents because your behavior is deemed an embarrassment. Oof, too personal.
We love you, son. We want to help you.
Then believe me. I'm telling the truth.
But again, these things were very deliberate, and I think everyone involved in building out this story was well aware of what they were doing. And to be fair, it's really not a secret that the film's commentary on teenage alienation is one of the movie's main praises. And then it hit me. There was a clear X Factor sitting right in front of me this entire time, a shining glimmer of aligning stars which gave me the very thing I had been searching for, the thing that makes The Faculty a true cinematic darling. Zeke's haircut. No, but really, the standout X Factor of the film has been in front of us the entire time. It's the cast. I know. You're thinking,
Kier, how can the cast be the X Factor of the movie? It's not an accidental decision, and it was obviously an intentional decision made by the casting department or the filmmakers or the studio involved in putting together the movie.
Yes, I know. But at the time this movie was being made, the cast were not considered A-list actors, and certainly not considered an all-star lineup. Think about it, man. This movie was Elijah Wood right before he became the iconic Frodo Baggins in The Lord of the Rings. And we had Famke Janssen right on the cusp of being Jean Grey in the X-Men films. And hey, there's Usher right before making his smooth R&B hits like Confessions. And not to mention the wild ride that Jordana Brewster would be taken on with the Fast saga. This movie was a goldmine of tapped and untapped potential. The supporting cast was obviously well thought out, with Salma Hayek playing the school nurse, Robert Patrick as the rough and hard-ass football coach, of course, and Jon Stewart as the science teacher, perhaps best known for the scene where he gets revealed as an alien.
This is usually the point where somebody says, let's get the fuck out of here.
Let's get the fuck out of here.
Thinking about the quote-unquote child cast of this movie is really special when you see that most of its stars are still working consistently in Hollywood today. And it may sound cliche to praise the way these young actors approach their on-screen dynamic, but hey, it's my show and it must be said by me. Yeah, it was good. I liked it. With Elijah Wood's character, Casey, being our straight man, we get to really examine the differences and complications of our star quarterback, our obligatory gothic youth, our prom queen, our choir girl, and Josh Hartnett's character, who is the story's John Bender, for all intents and purposes. And it truly makes this movie feel like so much more than a bargain bin summer romp from your formative years, and more like a time capsule that reminds us that before Frodo Baggins was roaming Middle-earth with walking trees and creepy critters, he was in a pool house, getting high on homemade drugs and saving Ohio from an alien invasion.
Guaranteed to jack you up.
And through my rewatches of this movie over the years, the cast has been the one thing that everybody seems to remember. People are like, hey, wasn't Usher in that one? Or, oh yeah, the other one where Robert Patrick is a terrifying supernatural being. And I'm like, yeah, The Faculty is 25 years old, and it may have faded into obscurity for most, but there are a small few out there who will know exactly what I mean when I say that you should only run if you're being chased.
In the space of 27 blood-soaked minutes, 12 innocent people gunned down.
Get me off!
6 ectoplasmic emanations. Don't worry, they can't escape.
Well, that's just terrific, honey. We've been in town for 3 months, and you're making friends with the Manson family.
I came by train. I was going to take the flight, but I didn't feel good about the plane.
No, I'm gone.
Question: what makes the hero of a good story worth rooting for? Are we looking for the tragic backstory that forces us to sympathize? Do we need to see our hero lose everything so that we can truly wish for them to gain it all back? Is it the underdog with good intentions who seemingly has flaws that any audience member can relate to? Or could it be that what makes a hero of a story is just having the most lines and the most to do in a given scene? Either way, if a hero talks like a hero and seemingly behaves like a hero, but is completely motivated by their own agenda and personal gain, are they still the hero? What if this person's motivation changes and their humanity is restored by the end of it all? Can we overlook their initial selfishness? Well, in the case of the Frighteners and Frank Bannister, who for all intents and purposes is the hero of this story, the lines become blurry as we find ourselves rooting for him as kind of an everyman who has flaws and layers that are easily relatable. He's a mostly regular guy who suffered a terrible tragedy and has found himself largely disconnected from his community and society as his way of coping. Or at least, that's what we're meant to think.
Okay, well, folks, I can do a clearance, but it's not gonna be cheap. Although I do offer a 6-month guarantee.
The Frighteners is Peter Jackson's cult classic that has been cast into the shadow of the director's more notable works, as in this movie was Jackson's final film before his career would change forever with the release of the highly beloved Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's a story about grief, obsession, and redemption as we follow Frank, a paranormal investigator with a sixth sense who can see and talk to ghosts, which he uses to haunt the locals and thus generate business for his ghost-catching hustle.
Frank Bannister's psychic investigator? That's right. Well, that's a good one. How come you didn't see the corner coming? You stupid moron.
But when Frank starts seeing the mark of a dead local serial killer on potential living victims, he must find a way to conquer the dead in order to save the living. But what we really see is a broken man with an incredible gift who learns to push the limits of his ability and hopes to make up for the skeletons in his own closet. It's a dark and macabre tale that will entertain you at every turn. And in today's episode, we're gonna cross over into the afterlife and see what makes the Frighteners a true cinematic haunt. I'm Kier Gomes with JoBlo Horror, and you're watching Deconstructing. Alright folks, today we get into The Frighteners, and right off the bat I have to admit, this movie is by far one of my favorite ghost stories of all time. Peter Jackson delivered us a visually entertaining film with heart and soul at the core, and I eat it up every single time. But as always on this show, I'm here to break down the film into 4 key categories that can help to narrow down why it's so special. We're going to be looking at the origin, where I talk about the behind the scenes of the film and how it got made, which, spoiler alert, is a very interesting story all on its own. Then we talk about the legacy of the film, where we cover some of the more timeless aspects of the movie that are still recognizable today. Moving on to trivia, where I'll give you some fun facts about the movie that you can share with your friends. And then we cap it all off by talking about the film's X factor, where I get into the single detail that truly makes this movie a worthwhile rewatch. And I have a feeling that that topic will be an especially difficult one for me due to my love and admiration for this film.
You realize, Agent Dammers, we have no forensic evidence linking him with any of the deaths.
Doesn't matter.
Now, The Frighteners has an entire documentary dedicated to the making of the film, but to distill it down to its most interesting version, here we go. Peter Jackson and his wife, Fran Walsh, originally conceived The Frighteners in 1992 with a 3-page treatment that pitched the general story. The treatment ended up in the hands of Back to the Future director Robert Zemeckis, who planned to use the idea as a spin-off film to the popular Tales from the Crypt TV series. Of course, after Jackson and Walsh delivered Zemeckis a full screenplay, he quickly saw the potential for the movie to exist on its own and hired Jackson to direct, with Zemeckis acting as an executive producer and financier. The film was given a budget of $26 million and got the green light from Universal Pictures to start shooting in 1994. But oh, that's not all.
Oh, plus $100 for materials. I can't be out of pocket.
Just do it for Christ's sakes, Bannister.
The script was so well received that Jackson and Zemeckis were also given full creative control to make the movie they wanted to make. They had what's known as final cut privilege, which means that they decided on the final edit of the film. And to me, this makes all the difference, and we will be talking more about that later. Weta Digital signed on for the movie's visual effects, and this is probably easy to notice once someone points it out, but the ghosts in this movie look very similar to the ghosts in Lord of the Rings.
The dead do not suffer the living to pass.
The pale blue and transparent design adds a coldness to them that kind of makes them a signature VFX calling card for Jackson's movies. And in case you need to hear me say it, I fucking love the look of the ghosts.
Talking about, you're in great shape.
My joints are getting powdery.
The making of this movie would prove to be a perfect training ground for Jackson to hone his skills that would later come in handy in his Lord of the Rings work, but also for Weta Digital, as when this movie was made, they had less than 3 years experience in digital effects. The Frighteners used more visual effects than almost any other movie ever at that time. It was something that audiences had never seen in this capacity before, and that in and of itself makes this movie special. It feels like everyone involved was pushing new limits while making it, and it shines through in every aspect of this movie. While today we see visual effects in almost every movie, at the time, shooting Michael J. Fox interacting with a ghost in the same shot meant that each scene needed to be filmed twice. The actors playing humans like Michael J. Fox, Trini Alvarado, Jeffrey Combs, and Troy Evans never did their scenes with any actors who played ghosts. For example, in this scene where Frank has to explain to Ray that he's dead, Fox had to stand on the set and say his lines to like a tennis ball off screen. And then Peter Dobson, playing a ghost, filmed his responses to Frank's lines in front of a blue screen, which they then digitally composited into the film and made it look like two people talking. This is also known as split screen photography, which again is much easier now. Hell, even I can do it. While the production was difficult and taking longer than anticipated, the studio had so much faith in the final script that the film was given an extra $6 million, and the release date was pushed forward nearly half a year to make the summer blockbuster season. And as if having names like Peter Jackson, Robert Zemeckis, Michael J. Fox, and John Blick wasn't enough, the score for the film was done to perfection by Danny Elfman, who you know is the composer behind some of the best cinema in history. With revolutionary visual effects, a screenplay that inspired faith in the studios, and some of the biggest names in cinema attached to this movie, it was time to release the ghouls. Now, the question here is, what do we talk about when we talk about The Frighteners? When this movie was released in the summer of '96, it was met by what I personally believe can only be described as being dealt a bad hand.
Oh my God! Oh my God, I don't believe this. This is not happening!
Here's what I mean. The Frighteners is a film that takes a gothic and dark tone while also having a script packed with charm and wit and light dialogue. It's basically Tim Burton meets Ivan Reitman, or Batman Returns meets Ghostbusters.
Let's show this prehistoric bitch how we do things downtown.
The point that I'm trying to make is that this movie, despite being mostly tame and family friendly, save for a few violent scenes, the MPAA granted this film an R rating. Jackson fought to get the film a PG-13, which I believe it totally deserves.
You gotta just walk up to Frank, just look him in the eye and just say, Frank, give me what I want, I'ma bust your ass!
The movie was forced to wear the dreaded Rated R, which rendered the film's target audience unable to access it. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, and I definitely had friends who would not be allowed to watch certain movies strictly based on the rating. And while I think that's valid for some films, this movie is way too lighthearted to feel like an R-rated movie. Honestly, if Batman Returns can show this, and still get a PG-13, why can't the Frighteners show this without getting a rated R? And while we're on the topic, Jake Busey gives by far one of the most unhinged performances in this movie, and this is absolutely part of the film's legacy. His commitment to chewing the scenery as Johnny Bartlett and going full madman works perfectly in this wacky, dark movie. Gary Busey would be proud.
I can't wait to see old Ted's face when he hears the news.
Now, all of that to say that this movie underperformed at the box office, bringing in about $29 million, which was less than the movie cost to make and market. I believe that if the movie had been made PG-13, like it should have, The Frighteners would have been a haunting but magical summer blockbuster that we'd see getting the praise it deserves today. And the movie was very well received by audiences and critics, which further proves my theory to be correct, and I found this quote from Kenneth Turin from the LA Times that I think perfectly explains what we love about this film. Director Peter Jackson, at home with all kinds of excess in New Zealand, keeps everything spinning nicely, not even losing a step when the mood turns increasingly disturbing. This movie is remembered for being a beautiful and unique ghost story that isn't afraid to go to the dark places and deliver on the thrills. I watch it at least once a year, and it still gets me every time Frank kills himself to fight the Grim Reaper and then barely makes it back to life. I'm talking edge of my seat every time.
I gotta have an out-of-body experience.
What?
And I gotta have it right now.
And perhaps the most memorable aspect of this film, for better or worse, is the character Milton Dammers, an FBI agent who is left mentally fucked after surviving a childhood encounter with the Manson family.
My body is a roadmap of pain.
This dude is straight out of your worst nightmares, and his gross, creepy mannerisms and weird Shakespearean dialogue is severely disturbing. In fact, I take back everything I said. This movie deserves to be rated R just for this guy.
The power of the mind
is absolute.
Alright, let's play a game. See if you know the answer to this question. Which notorious serial killer was the character of Johnny Bartlett and his crimes inspired by in the film? Was it A, John Wayne Gacy, B, Richard Speck, C, Ted Bundy, or D, Charles Starkweather? Comment your answers below. For fans of horror, you probably also recognize Jeffrey Combs as Herbert in The Reanimator, another cult classic horror film. In fact, Peter Jackson specifically requested Combs for the role of Milton Dammers because of his performance in Reanimator. So I guess you could say,
I gave him life.
And one last fun fact for the fans, did you know that R. Lee Emery's dead drill sergeant cameo in this film was intentionally made to be almost identical to his character's hard-ass personality in Full Metal Jacket? I just think that one's fun.
You cannot bring your spooks in here without my permission! Disappear, scumbag!
And here we are, folks, the one that we really want to talk about, the one that is sure to be unique to this video and carefully curated to kick ass. I'm talking the X Factor. Now you know what I'm gonna say. This was tough. There's just so much to love about this movie and so many things that make it special to me. But what I'm looking for is something new. Something about this movie that hasn't been praised but deserves to be. Something spooky.
Bartlett carved it into my forehead as highly dying. I was the last.
While I don't think it would be unfair to give the X factor to the movie's incredible visual effects by Weta Digital and the immaculate set design that puts viewers directly into the scene, I can't do that because of course these things can be found receiving well-deserved praise from just about anybody who's seen the film. The New Zealand landscape gives the movie a bleak and rainy feel while also offering beautiful green mountains and a charming small town atmosphere. But to get away from the same compliments that this movie always gets, we need to keep looking. I even considered using this segment to talk about Frank's hustle as a ghost whisperer. When we meet Frank, he's a slick and fast-talking con artist who uses his ability to see and speak to ghosts to have his ghost buddies haunt local houses so that Frank can come in and kick them out.
Oh boy. Oh, this could be the worst case I've ever seen. Oh yeah, this is bad.
I think this really adds to the quality of the story, as it shows Frank's initial relationship to the dead was to use them to benefit himself. He had an almost lack of respect for them, and he saw them as merely tools for his craft.
That fellow takes us totally for granted.
But throughout the story, Frank grows to understand and empathize with these ghosts. It adds a lot to his arc in very subtle ways, and it's brilliant. But that still wasn't quite gonna do it for me. I got it. It's explained in the film that Frank's wife is killed in a car accident caused by Frank. This accident supposedly killed his wife, but granted Frank with the ability to see ghosts. Well, a side element to this is that Frank was building a beautiful house for himself and his wife before she died, but after her death, Frank continued living there, but never finished the build. His house doesn't have a roof, walls, safe floors, or any accommodations, yet Frank continues to live there. This shows us that Frank, being a grieving widower, does not feel content with moving on, partly because of the guilt he feels for supposedly killing his wife, which we learn later is not exactly true, but also showing that Frank's inability to move on is matched only by his inability to make his current environment comfortable. In Frank's mind, he doesn't deserve a fucking roof. He doesn't deserve a comfortable bed to sleep in or a kitchen to cook in. To Frank, he's already dead.
I mean, look at this place. It's a dump. God, this guy's a loser.
Seeing a man who believes he deserves nothing learn the shocking truth that eventually sets him free, and thus giving Frank a second chance at life.
Be happy.
Oh, it had to be the X Factor. It had to be. So my friends, as always, I am curious to know your thoughts on this cult classic film.
Oh, finally, I'm in the conversation. Terrific.
And we will see you next time on Deconstructing.
Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy. Your core audience just expects it. And number 3, if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never, ever.
Since the 1970s, Hollywood's knack for turning old stories into very new money has dominated the box office and still shows no signs of slowing down. Of course, I'm referring to franchise sequels, something that both divides and unites audiences in our desire to praise the good ones and completely overreact to the bad ones. But the point being made is that subsequent installments to popular movies is something that has existed for decades, and this is especially true for the horror genre, as horror movies tend to have smaller sets and lower budgets, which makes the films faster and cheaper to make. And for as long as sequels have existed, so has the ongoing clash of opinions where some folks think that sequels should be made, albeit made well, and others are wishing that this trend of IP overkill would end.
Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck.
No, come on, man.
Well, I don't want to speak for everyone, but spoiler alert, I love a good sequel, and I especially love a sequel that knows exactly what it is and what its audiences will think about it, and then completely subverts our expectations while winking right in our faces. And let's be honest, if anyone is going to take on the task of following up the most iconic teen slasher movie of the 90s while building on the original story and setting up interest for more installments, it had to be the man who started it all.
It's kind of a new classic. I think there might be other films like it, where we start commenting on actual films and actual film actors and actresses. I think it's kind of refreshing in a way, because we're really talking about a reality that's very much a part of our reality. Even though they're all sort of franchisable names and everything else, there's nothing harmful about talking about it in a film.
And it was this very concept that helped equip Craven and writer Kevin Williamson with the perfect idea for Scream 2. Using that self-aware meta approach, they would play into all the cliches that audiences have come to expect from sequels. And in today's episode, we are going to look at one of the genre's best follow-up films to figure out why it's awesome and just how classic a sequel can really be. I'm Kier Gomes with JoBlo Horror, and you're watching Deconstructing.
He's not a Nick at Night rerun type of guy. He wants to break some new ground.
Now, this show is all about breaking down what makes a certain movie tick, and not so much a movie review. So, with that being said, I will give a brief description of the plot, and then we'll be breaking down the movie from our 4 key categories. First, we talk about origin, where we discuss a brief history of the film and how it got made. Then we get into legacy, where we talk about some of the movie's most remembered moments that are still in the pop culture canon today. Followed by mystery and trivia, where I'll give you some fun facts about the movie that you can share with your fellow film lovers. And finally, we end it off by talking about the movie's X Factor, where we look at that one special moment that nobody could have accounted for. And believe me when I say, this movie has plenty to deconstruct, and I still have to fit in time for my Justice for Randy rant before the end.
How would you make it different?
I'd let the geek get the girl.
So if you're ready, then keep your backs to the wall, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe for all your favorite horror content. And let's hit play on Scream 2 continues the story of Sidney Prescott as she attempts to put her past behind her and salvage what's left of her life after the events of the first film. When bodies start dropping at her college, Sidney and the remaining survivors, including Dewey, Gail, and Randy, need to work together in order to survive the threat of a new sadistic serial killer donning the mantle of Ghostface. Now, I have some personal takes on why I love this movie, and I'll definitely get into that. But first, let's take a look at the extremely interesting history of Scream 2. Now, if you didn't know, the original Scream 2 script was actually leaked online during the rise of internet popularity, as in the internet itself becoming popular. And the leak revealed the names of the killers and most of the general plot. I think there's a whole video that could be made about this one topic. Oh wait, there is. Make sure you check out our JoBlo Horror original where we talk about what the f*** happened to this movie.
It'd be stupid to pull this movie. All this free press, they're gonna have huge numbers this weekend.
With the original plot details now being widely spread through the internet, Kevin Williamson had to rewrite the entire thing, only using some of the original ideas from the script. But you know that old saying in Hollywood, the show must go on. So the movie began production in June of 1997 with only a half of a script to work with while Williamson was finishing the new one. This resulted in more improvised scenes from the cast and more screenplay input from Craven. And to avoid the same situation moving forward, Kevin Williamson wrote a script with 3 very different endings so that if the word did get out, the information and details on the film would likely be incorrect. It wasn't until nearly 20 years later that Kevin Williamson himself admitted that the leaked script was never considered to be the official version. He quotes, They were worried the killer's identity would be leaked, so we wrote several endings, 3 in all, if memory serves, and when actors and potential crew members asked to read the script, we would send them the script with the dummy ending. There was even a fake ending where Dewey was the killer. They existed as a decoy and nothing more. Extreme measures, but we really wanted to keep the killer's identity a secret. With a makeshift script and a short production schedule, it was time to round up a cast. Neve Campbell was asked to reprise her role for a potential sequel before the movie was even announced. Wes Craven stated that he offered her the part with the pitch that her character would be the only one guaranteed to survive by the end. And seeing how the character of Sidney Prescott is still an important name among iconic final girls, it's safe to say that Craven made a smart move.
Consider it done.
Of course, you don't have a Scream movie without the sinister voice of Roger Jackson as Ghostface, and Dimension even got Courtney Cox, David Arquette, and Jamie Kennedy to return as their characters. Oh yeah, and Cotton Weary, played by Liev Schreiber, had a great part in this movie as well.
Talk to Cotton. He's the man you want to interview. He's the hero.
With a newly minted all-star cast of young actors, a legendary horror director, and a hard working-on-the-fly screenwriter, it was time to roll camera on Scream 2. Now, what do we talk about when we talk about Scream 2? First of all, this movie cemented one element that has remained consistent throughout the entire franchise thus far by introducing Ghostface to be a different killer. Now, up until this point, it was rare to see horror movies that reprise the same protagonist but completely switch out the killers. I mean, look at the slashers before this. Nightmare on Elm Street, always Freddy. Halloween, always Michael Myers. Except for Halloween Ends, I guess. The point is, in the original Scream film, the killers died at the end and 4 of our main characters survived. This movie brings back all the final protagonists and keeps Ghostface as the movie's bad guy, but the identity of Ghostface is never the same across multiple movies. That may not seem like too far of a stretch now, but at the time, it was the entire allure of watching these movies.
Nice twist, huh? Didn't see it coming, did ya?
As Scream was the breakout success of 1996, Scream 2 delivered on following up the best pieces from the original while adding something fresh and new to the saga. Scream 2 was released to theaters in December of 1997, and to no one's surprise, it was a huge hit. The movie was made on an increased budget than the first, obviously, with Miramax giving Craven a budget of $24 million. And the movie finished its box office lifetime with a worldwide total of $172.4 million. And the movie still remains in the top 500 highest grossing US films of all time. Reviews for the movie were also generally favorable, with Rotten Tomatoes showing a strong 82% and praising the movie's meta commentary and fresh story. You know what? Kinda hard to disagree. And I don't know about 82% on Rotten Tomatoes, but I do know that us at JoBlo Horror are 100% Cotton.
So, you a big 100% Cotton fan?
And on a more personal note, I'm still disappointed that they axed my man Randy Meeks in the second act of this movie. While I can ultimately make the case for killing off the most knowledgeable character in the cast is a smart idea for Ghostface, I feel like since we saw Randy laying dead and bloody in the back of that news van, things for Scream can never be quite the same. Sure, I love all the Scream films, and sure, I don't think a 45-year-old movie geek is the missing ingredient from the saga at this point, but I really believe that ever since this moment in Scream 2, the writers of every Scream movie since have been trying to work in a suitable movie buff replacement. Take Kirby or Sam, for example. What I'm really trying to say is that no matter how many brilliant things this movie gives me, I'll always think of Scream 2 as the one where Randy dies. And that's just f***ing tragic.
A lot of shit happens at the movies. People get robbed, shot, maimed, murdered. Multiplex is just a very dangerous place to be these days.
But of course, how can we talk about Scream 2 and the iconic status that it's reached without talking about
Mrs. Loomis? What?
Billy's mother!
Who are we kidding? Did any of you suspect Aunt Jackie from Roseanne to be the mastermind behind these gruesome killings? I sure as hell didn't. Part of the fun of the Scream films is trying to figure out not only who may be wearing the Ghostface mask and killing off the core group, but also trying to predict what kind of outlandish motives they may have. And Scream 2 does a wonderful job of subverting those expectations by giving you a reason to suspect everyone in the group without giving any thought to this small-time Gale Weathers wannabe who is secretly out for blood for her son's killer.
If the killer is repeating what happened in Woodsboro, it's quite possible that the killer could be from Woodsboro. That's all.
But I did make one note on this scene where it would have been cool if at one point during the movie, Sidney maybe saw Debbie Salt and gave like a throwaway line or a look to say like, "Don't I know her?" And that maybe would have given the reveal a little bit more weight in my opinion, especially since the other killer, Mickey, brilliantly played by Timothy Olyphant, is one of the least likely suspects.
No, Billy was a sick fuck who tried to get away with it. Mickey is a sick fuck who wants to get caught. Yeah, see?
And also, can we just appreciate that we still kind of thought Derek was the killer even up to the very last second? So, remember when I said that the original script for the movie was leaked online, which led to a huge rewrite? Well, get this. Turns out Matthew Lillard, who plays Stu Macher, my personal favorite Ghostface, can be seen in an uncredited cameo appearance in Scream 2 as like a party goer at Sydney's college.
Surprise cameo just for you.
While the character of Stu Macher had been killed in the previous movie, it was revealed in 2009 by Lillard that the original plan for Scream 3 was to have Stu Macher revealed to be alive and the killer behind the events of the second movie. Something that I think we all hope to see at some point in Radio Silence's Scream trilogy. And honestly, for a franchise as meta as this one, why wouldn't they use the original idea for the third movie in a later sequel? I'm just saying.
We're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
And speaking of cameos, it's time for a game. Let's see if you can answer this question. Which I Know What You Did Last Summer star played Cece in a supporting role in this film? Was it A, Jennifer Love Hewitt, B, Bridget Wilson, or C, Sarah Michelle Gellar? Comment below if you know the answer.
Do you want to die tonight, Cece?
And now for the big one, the most anticipated, the reason we're all here, the X Factor. So in case I wasn't clear, I love the Scream movies, but when it comes to the X Factor, none of that matters. I'm on the hunt for the one thing that takes this movie from a good sequel to an iconic film of its own merit. I'm looking for something you can't hear about in any old retrospective on the internet. I'm looking for something weird.
It's really weird, isn't it? To think this fuss is all because of you.
Initially, I wanted to use this segment as a way to talk about the story arc and incredible character work. We can see how the trauma and the pain of Scream impacted these once innocent people and how each of them are dealing with that pain differently. Randy hides behind English accents and the escapism of movies, while Sidney will probably never trust a man the same way again. Gale capitalized while Dewey hardened, and Mrs. Loomis masterminded a body count of 10 victims. But can that be the X Factor? I don't think so. It was clearly an intentional point made by Williamson and Craven. And as it was with our last episode, I was just about to throw in the towel and give up on finding the X Factor when all of a sudden, it hits me.
Hello?
So the X Factor for the original Scream movie was obviously the opening kill scene with Drew Barrymore. And before I could finish replaying that awesome scene in my head, I realized that the opening kill scene in Scream 2 is probably the most memorable scene in the entire movie. Could it be that the ultimate meta-ness of Scream 2 is that it shares the very same JoBlo horror deconstructing X Factor as the original? Was hiring Jada Pinkett Smith and Omar Epps to be killed in the first scene at a movie theater the perfect way to open a movie that audiences would be seeing for the first time in a movie theater and completely scared the shit out of us? Is it possible that the opening kill scene in Scream 2 is the thing that sets this movie apart? No, not quite.
I hope that was an off-the-cuff remark that holds no subtext whatsoever.
Hold your horses now. Before you go commenting, let me explain. It's not the opening scene as a whole, although I guess it could be. This movie opens up at a movie theater where two students are at the premiere of a movie based on the events of the first movie. Is that too meta?
Star of the Gale Weathers press conference, based on the book by Gale Weathers, soon to be a major motion picture starring Gale Weathers.
They're going to see a movie called Stab, and it's based on a book that Gale Weathers wrote about the Ghostface killings from Scream. The Stab movies and the characters' commentary on them have become kind of a mirror to reflect the Scream franchise fans, but in this movie, it represents the beginning of almost every other killer's motive going forward. Spoilers for the entire Scream franchise, starting now. So, Stab is introduced in Scream 2, and if you look at each killer's motive going forward, the Stab movies play some role in the ultimate motivation. Aside from Roman's motive in Scream 3, which was probably the weakest out of all of them. However, he did do the killings on a Stab set, so it counts. Then you look at Scream 4 with Jill's envy for Sidney's fame as a survivor. That was something that was born with Stab. Scream 5, of course, deals with toxic fandom as two crazed fans of the Stab franchise attempt to inspire a fresh new story. And even Mickey's motive in Scream 2 somewhat matches this theory. The whole "movies made me do it" bit really touches on similar ideas.
Mickey was a good boy, but my God, that whole blame the movies motive. Did you buy that for 1 second?
So no doubt, the Stab movies are indeed the X factor of Scream 2. At the end of the day, Scream 2 is a great sequel, but it's also a great movie. It's something that I love, and after deconstructing it, I finally understand why.
Did you get that on film?
Yes, I got that on film.
Alright folks, this is where I kick things off to you and ask that you comment your thoughts on Scream 2 down below. Also, please feed the algorithm with your theories on the upcoming Scream 6. We would love to read them. But of course, always remember that stupid people turn back and smart people run. So I'm gonna be smart and run out of here. Good night.
Enjoy. See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya.